Hello, good morning to everyone. Thank you for participating at this parallel session. Today, we will talk governance and the strengths of cities to improve resilience. I am Aytor Naranjo. I will be the moderator of this session. I'm Business Development Director at Lobelia Earth, a Barcelona-based SME specialized in satellite technology, computational intelligence, and software visualization for climate action. I would like first to provide some context about this the session we will have today before introducing our key speakers. So adaptation to climate change is not only a technical issue, above all is a matter of governance. Governance is more than government and includes the totality of interactions in which public as well as private actors, but also research institutions and third sector organization participate, aiming to solve societal problems. So adaptation governance comes with some specific demanding challenges, such as the context of institutional fragmentation. And this is because climate change involves almost all policy domains and governance levels. So in fact, urban governance systems, institutions, are typically established around specific issue areas. It can be water, health, infrastructure, public works, spatial planning, among others, and this within municipalities. And sometimes at city scale that includes multiple municipalities in the case of greater metropolitan areas, which also interacts with broader levels of governance from state, province, national, or even international levels. Other adaptation governance challenges are the persistent uncertainties about the nature and scale of risks and proposed solutions, as well as the need to make short-term policies based on long-term projections. So climate change has significant impact on ecosystems, functioning and well-being of people. And climatic stress influence society through health-related effects and socio-economic impacts by increased number of heat waves, droughts, or flooding events, for example. So in addition to climate change, urbanization and the corresponding increase in the number and sizes of cities are also impacting ecosystems with a number of interlinked pressures. So these pressures include loss and degradation of natural areas, soil sealing, and the densification of built-up areas, for example. In Barcelona, in the city I'm from, in 1959, the city had a soil sealing rate of 45%. And in 2009, that went up to 72%, which means that in Barcelona, just about 30% of the land in the city allows infiltration of runoff during heavy rains, which brings additional significant challenge to ecosystems functionality. So today we will discuss the strengths of cities to improve resilience and how nature-based solutions have the potential to overcome the pressures related to climate change and urbanization. So this session will provide theoretical examples and practical examples as well from experts in science, policy, and practice who will provide an overview of the current state of knowledge in the innovation in governance and the effectiveness and implementation of nature-based solutions and their potential to the provision of ecosystem services for climate change adaptation and co-benefits in urban areas. So without further delay, I will give the floor to María Adriana Cardoso. She's a civil engineer, PhD, researcher at the Urban Water Unit at the National Civil Engineering Laboratory of Portugal. And today she will be walking us through a step-by-step development of a resilience action plan. Sorry, so the floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Just to share my screen. This presentation has the co-authors Rita Salgado Brito and Cristina Pereira, both from LNEC. And it focuses on the development step-by-step of a resilience action plan. This work was developed within the RESCCUE project. I believe that at this time, all of you already know the RESCCUE project, the Resilience to Cope with Climate Change in Urban Areas, which is the organizer of this conference. And this development regards the development of the framework and the implementation in the 3 RESCCUE research site cities, Barcelona, Bristol, and Lisbon. But it is tailored to be applied to any other city. So I will focus, after a brief introduction, on the resilience action plans, mainly the objective, the planning process, the scope, and the step-by-step development, and then some final remarks and recommendations for other cities. And I will give you also some references for those that want to go deeper in some steps. So as has been highly discussed in this conference, urban areas are dynamic, complex, and vulnerable, and they have many water cycle related risk sources and multiple strategic urban services and stakeholders. And to build resilience in the cities involves to characterize the sources of risk, the exposure, and the vulnerability, and to take into account all the interactions between the multiple service sectors and stakeholders. The development of the resilience action plans now allows to know where the city stands, to develop the strategies, and to plan in the long, medium, and short terms. The objective of a resilience action plan is to provide a city roadmap to improve city resilience, in this case, within the scope of the RESCCUE project, which is to climate change and focusing on the urban water cycle. So this is a thematic plan that intends to contribute to the overall city resilience planning and provides a path to be followed. In this case, in the case of this process, it is sustained on the work already in place and ongoing in the cities, and on the characterization of the city and of the systems, and then the planning, the analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, the development of the strategies, and the identification of the resources needed to implement the plan. So this planning process is based, the first step is to analyze what is already ongoing in the city. The city has already an intense work on resilience, and so this background is fundamental to be kept. Then a city characterization with key indicators and including also the services that are addressed. Then to identify the climate change scenarios that will be considered in the plan, and based on these climate change scenarios to define the planning scenarios. After that, for these scenarios, to provide to carry out a risk assessment, both for the current situation and for the scenarios, a resilience assessment, and integrate all the information in a SWOT analysis, identifying the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. And this is a support to identify resilient strategies through a TAOS analysis and through decision methods to select those strategies that will be considered in the plan, to describe these strategies, including the resources needed in order to define the implementation process. And finally, to identify the monitoring and the review process. Within all these steps, several models and tools are used. Some models and tools already exist in the cities and are those that the cities are used to develop. But many tools were developed within the project in order to allow for the cities, for any city, to develop a resilience action plan. So as an example, the identification of the work in place and ongoing, the 3 cities, Barcelona, Bristol, and Lisbon, was carried out. It identifying all the partnerships, all the constraints, the hazards that are affecting the cities. And the resilience to climate change is highly related with urban service resilience, their interdependencies and cascading effects. And this was taken into account and is common to any city, to all the cities. In each step, I am including here the references that may help and may support further information on each one of the steps. So the characterization of the city by key indicators, including aspects related to geography, climate, population, built environment and infrastructures, historical events that occurred in each city. The services characterization, including the entities and the responsibles for the service provision, the area covered by the service, information on infrastructure, climate-related hazards for each infrastructure. And in the case of rescue, the services that are addressed are the water supply, wastewater, stormwater, waste, electrical energy, and mobility services. Then the definition of the climate change and planning scenarios for the hazards identified to be included in the plan, the climate change scenarios that will be addressed in the plan, and then the downscale at the urban scale, both temporal and spatial scale, regarding the variables that affect related to these hazards, and then the scenarios, the definition of the scenarios that are being planned. In the case of rescue, the hazards are flood, cold wave, droughts, heat wave, water turbidity, and combined sewer overflows. Here, an example of the risk assessment for flooding. And in this step, several models and tools were used. Each city applied different models and different tools. So results were obtained through hazard mapping, both for the current situation as well as for the medium and long-term scenarios. And the same approach was applied to analyze the implementation of the strategies. The exposure and vulnerability including the interdependencies between the services, was considered, namely regarding the interdependencies between urban drainage and mobility, energy, and waste. And the resilience assessment was carried out using a resilience assessment framework that was developed within RESCUE. This is structured by dimension: organizational, spatial, functional, and physical, through the definition of objectives for each one of these dimensions. These are the dimensions recommended by UN Habitat, which is a partner of the project, and give support also in the development of this assessment framework. These two first dimensions are mainly related with the city at the city scale, global city scale, regarding the government's relationships, the urban space and environments. And the functional and physical are more related with the services within the city and the infrastructures. There are metrics that assess each objective, and it is possible to analyze the development level regarding each dimension, objective, or criteria, identifying where there are the main opportunities to improve. Then a SWOT analysis integrates all the assessments, identifying the main strengths, the main weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for each city. And based on that, a TAUS analysis was carried out, identify strategies that reduce the city's threats, overcome weaknesses, and exploit strengths and opportunities. And also, using the decision methods, the strategies were selected for each city. In Barcelona and Bristol, 4 strategies were included in the plan. In Lisbon, 6 strategies, 6, 7, because there are someone that could be aggregated, were included in the plan and were characterized, including the stakeholders that are involved, the hazards that are addressed, the identification of the measures that that include each strategy, analyzing the co-benefits, analyzing the risk assessment, the improvement on risk assessment, and also analyzing the impact on the resilience assessment of objectives, both for the organizational and spatial dimension, and also for the services dimensions. Then prioritization of the strategies of the measures was carried out, what allows to define the implementation plan, and then the process of monitoring and review that is already established in this plan in order to ensure the continuous process improvement and to consider the city dynamics. So as a final remarks and recommendation for the cities, it is important to not start from scratch, to use results already existing in the city, using the existing backgrounds or the knowledge from other cities, to involve a mixed team, a transversal team made up by the different entities and coordinated by the municipality, to involve the key sectors of the city that are commonly forgotten. One example is the heritage management, to promote the involvement and communication among the stakeholders, even if it seems a challenge at first, and for instance, through the organization of workshops and discussion of the main concerns, and including all these concerns in the plan development. Allocate specific budgets for resilience. Consider the negotiation of MAUs, of Memorandums of Understanding with local government partners in order to establish responsibilities and assure transparency between the different actors. Use the lessons and experience from extreme events, even if not weather related, because they may contribute to improve the emergency and response procedures, commit the budget priorities to sustainable development and consider other indicators not exclusively economic, and then move from the plan to action since climate change does not wait. Here are a set of references that go into more detail in each one of the steps for those that are interested. And then acknowledgement are due to all rescue partners and to the research site leaders, because this is a work of all the consortium, the rescue consortium, all the partners contributed to this development. No one was left behind. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. Very interesting presentation on the rescue project and the resilience action plan in these different cities that also have different needs and different stakeholders. I have just a message for the audience. There's a Q&A section, and we really encourage you to use the chat of the Q&A to submit your questions. I have actually a question for Maria. So very interesting to see how all the dimensions are considered, yeah. And concerning the characterization of sources of risks. So are you using climate models for this, for taking into consideration the potential impacts of potential climate scenarios in the future, in 20, 30, 40 years periods? But are you using like global climate models for example, for Lisbon, or are you using downscale climate projections that are applied to Lisbon itself?
Within the rescue, there were a work package dedicated to the climate change scenarios at the downscale. I'm not the expert on this part, so I was responsible for all this integration, but each step has his own experts and his own teams developing each one of the steps. But there was the development of these scenarios at downscale, at the urban scale. But for instance, in Lisbon, there was already climate change scenarios that the city had already defined on the other developments, strategic developments within the city. So the comparison between these different approaches was made, and as well as in the other cities. So the main concern was that any city that wanted to develop a resilience action plan could have the methods and the tools to do that if they already don't have its own scenarios defined. So in this case, it was developed, these projections, it was made downscale at the city's scale, and then compared with the scenarios that the cities already have, in order to allow the development of the risk assessments for these scenarios. Yeah. More detail, you can maybe, I suggest to try to contact the experts of this working package, the developments, and the references are at the end of my presentation, and they participate also in this conference, so maybe it is a good suggestion to try to contact them but the project provided the means to any city to carry out this definition.
Yeah, definitely, I think it is really important for any city that want to do their resilience action plan to have properly done downscale climate projections in order to base their action plan on these different scenarios, and then really spotting what are the climate related risks in these cities.
Yeah.
And yes, I've seen at the end of your presentation you have an impressive list of references. So I see that there's a lot of research has been put into this project. All right, so now I will introduce our second speaker, Fang-yu. She has a PhD in architecture from the University of Paris Est, and she's been involved in the Corfu project that she will talk now. That's a European EU-funded FP7 project, and her R&D activities expand to urban climate resilient design in the Gustave Eiffel University and Sixth Sense Engineering. So Fang-yu, she will be presenting a theory of spatial planning and flood risk management. So a systematic approach to the flood resilience assessment. And she will be going through two specific case studies, one in Barcelona and one in Taipei. So Fang-yu, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me in this session, and let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Fang-yu Hu. I was born and grew up in Taipei, where I experienced the devastating effect on flash flooding caused by passage of typhoons. I'm now Paris-based urban planner and the research fellow for the project related to urban climate resilient design. Today, my presentation centers on an assessment model could be considered as a collaborative platform between technical engineering science and space science for flood risk management project. It is developed within my doctoral research and within Corfu project. Barcelona and Taipei were two of 7 case studies of Corfu project suffered from flash flood. I acknowledge the contribution from Corfu project, Barcelona and Taipei partner. I also appreciate the exchange and the comments I received from those group of researchers and my PhD supervisors. Today, my presentation will divide in 4 main parts. Firstly, I will start with a brief introduction to my research question, hypothesis, goal, and methods. For the second part of my presentation, I will discuss the relation between concept of vulnerability and resilience in order to elaborate a spatial planning procedure for urban flood resilient management containing output of Corfu work packages. The third part of my presentation is to show how these procedures could adapt to analysis of Barcelona and Taipei city, taking into account the climate change scenarios. I will include this presentation by stressing the benefits and the limits of the 5R layer matrix as well as by suggesting potential direction for further research. Floods are the challenge cities around the world, despite of them being protected by extensive structural flood risk mitigation measures. Nowadays, urban growth in floodplain and climate change lead to questions strategy based solely on a technical defense approach to reduce the probability of flooding. In order to reverse the observed trend, the question then arises as to how to reverse a trend of increasing urban flood risk vulnerability by involving approach of urban spatial and landscape planning. This research is part of theoretical current which intend to go beyond a technical defense approach toward integrated one, leading to living with floods. Recent paradigm shifts on flood risk management imply not only needs to consider flood risk and its management in the process of urban spatial planning, but also the need to bring actors from multidisciplinary teams together and work collaboratively. However, we note that the absence of a common language between researchers on the one hand, and the planner, and on the other hand, we have noted the need to build interdisciplinary approach. To answer the question, this research, our research questions is how can we develop an assessment tool to communicate it to the different science and based on the concept of resilience. Especially, it's important to including spatial temporal dimension of management. Spatial temporal dimension, we talk about before, during, and after a flood, and spatial dimension, we talk about watershed scale to building scales. So to answer these research questions, we proposed two tools. One named Urban Spatial Morphology System, and the other one is an evaluation tool to evaluate this the capacity of this urban spatial morphology system. And this assessment tool, we named it as a 5R layer matrix. These tools are based on the assumption that this assessment tool can be considered as a collaborative platform between the different disciplines, the science from different disciplines, especially technological engineering and space science. So the urban spatial morphology system, that the most important idea was focusing on urban spatial morphology system. Our study considered urban flood risk as one of essential elements which can trigger urban regeneration by reconfiguring components of this system. Based on this, based on the concept of vulnerability, especially a synoptic flood vulnerability, urban flood resilient planning procedures containing output of work package of Corfu project was developed. And today, my presentation is focused on the 5R layer matrix. Here is in the planning procedure is situated. The concept, the mainly concept of this 5R layer matrix, we base on the concept of resilience strategies. It means we translate it in the urban spatial morphology system is that all the components of this system are arranged not only to resist the flood, but also relieve and recover from their impact, as well as adapt themselves to next floods. The latter concept puts a flood risk management strategy into a long-term perspective. Furthermore, this research proposed to consider resilience as the ability of planners or stakeholders to build a set of appropriate instruments and measures by integrating a spatial temporal dimension of flood risk management. It's why we arranged this tool in 5 layers: a layer of resist, the layer called resist, reduce, response, recovery, readapt, and reflect. Each R of proposed 5R layer group has a specific type dimension. It means before, during, and after a flood. And it should be a test in different also spatial scales. Now I will demonstrate how this tool could be useful for urban project. I take Taipei and Barcelona for as a case study because both of them, the morphology of these 2 cities present an area close to mountain or high hill with a high gradients. The morphology produced a quick storage of storm water in the down city in case of medium or heavy rainfall events. Due to the heavy rainfall events and during the typhoons, the minor managed drainage system of these 2 cities are challenges. Consequently, both of these urban areas suffered from flash flood. The lead time for crisis management ranged from 3 or 6 hours, but in the case of Barcelona, the lead time of crisis management ranged from 1 or 2 hours because due to the weather forecasting technique. In certain cases, the arrangement of major drainage system could be one of solution for evacuating flood water. I will talk about this solution in Barcelona case study later on. For the Corfu project, the Reval district was selected to case study in Barcelona city, and the Nangang district was selected for a Taipei case study. We are aware that Taipei suffered from pluvial and fluvial floods, but in the Corfu project, we consider that Taipei is protected by a high wall from the fluvial flood with a current recurrence of 200 years. In order to simplify the model inputs, our project, Corfu project, did an assumption that there were mainly the pluvial flood risk in Taipei. So we only run the hydraulic model for the pluvial floods. So here now I show you the output of the work package 2 of Corfu project. Taking the output of the work package 2, I overlapped the flood map in ArcGIS to identify the special temporal sequence of flooding in this area in case of or a flood of 10 years return flood, and is including climate change scenarios. We can see that in Reval districts, several heritage, cultural heritage and buildings, as well as metro stations would be flooded. And in Taipei, Nangang district, district administration building and several 5 meters high office building, as well as pump station, would be flooded. Based on actual implemented measure and instrument of flood risk management in these 2 areas, an evaluation work of 5R an evaluation work were operated by 5R layer matrix. And we can observe that the city government, they have a strong engagement in the risk management project, and have a they have engaged for the adaptation for climate change. However, the most of measures implemented was concentrate on structural measures. And we can see that in the reduced layer, it means that we leave the water sometimes flooded in the urban area. This kind of measure was not really implemented for the moment. And we can also see that in the response layers, that all urban strategy functions were not really protected from this kind of flooding. And I want to attract your attention about how can we implement it in new reduced layer measures in Barcelona city. My argument are as follows. We can see that in the map that this avenue names Ramblas. I will see a little bit history about this road. It was an ancient dried up river. So we could wondering if the nature sometimes takes slowly back its place when during these extreme events. And also, I have some research about the concept that I mentioned before, the major and minor drainage system. The minor drainage system means all the drainage system is underground. And some researchers, they propose to install some major drainage system like a road or a water course to drain 20 or 100 years returned period flood waters. So
sorry,
perhaps,
Fang-yu,
yeah.
Sorry, can you please? We need to speed up. We're against the clock.
Yeah. Okay. I will finish it yet.
That's all right. Thanks.
So perhaps in use this tool, we can suggest this kind of implement measures for reduce or buffering flood risk in Barcelona city. So I conclude that this matrix could be platformed between different scientists work on flood risk management project. And also it's important to integrate spatial and temporal dimension in the management project. And also we need to take into account the geo-historical dimension of a city. So we can, and then we can imply this kind of tool in the other project. And I would like to attract your attention that in a reality, the flood risk management is more complex than that, because in Taipei, in the Corfu project, we do assumption that the city will protected by high wall, but in the reality, in 2001, there is some maintenance work on the high wall and the dike, and the city was flooded because of this maintenance work. So sometimes we have to, we still have to move on more detail, develop more detailed methodology work to collaborate and reduce the damages. Here is, thank you. I finished my presentation, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fang-yu. I really like the idea of reconfiguring the traditional components of the system, and to live with floods. This is hard to say, but that's the reality. And as you have shown in your 2 case studies in Barcelona and Taipei, sometimes we need to cope with changing climate and very high return periods that maybe decades ago urban planners did not consider in their when they were building our infrastructures. Again, as I mentioned earlier, it would be great that that you use the chat for the Q&A. As we are running a little bit ahead of time, I will introduce our next speaker, Khamis. Rim is an architect and an environmentalist, and she's currently undergoing her PhD in geography and planning at the University of Pau and the Adour region in France. She will be talking today about adaptation strategies in mid-sized French cities and the role of local authorities in a centralized country as France in addressing the global issue of climate change. So the floor is yours, Rim.
Thank you, Aytor. So as you mentioned, I'm working on climate adaptation strategies in mid-sized French cities to highlight the role of local authorities in addressing an issue of global relevance. So I'm going to quickly go over some slides since we're running out of time, but if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask me. So I'm focusing on adaptation because climate change is happening. We're already dealing with the consequences, and researchers have shown that even if emissions were to stop today, we'll be dealing with the consequences for decades to come. Just a second, I think I have on. I'm trying to share my screen. Yeah. Yeah, can you see the screen? Hello?
Yes, we can see your screen.
So I'm focusing on mid-sized cities in particular because cities of this scale, they have challenges and opportunities. So they're challenging because they attract the largest share of urban citizens in Europe. They could have limited technical, financial, and human resources in comparison to larger cities. But they also present some opportunities because usually in smaller municipalities, the lines of communications are short and straight. And it's a limited geographical scale, so the damage is limited. And the expansion of these cities could present opportunities for adaptation. Yeah. So France is an interesting case study because it has international commitments, it has national and EU objectives, and there were various laws in place recognizing the role of local authorities in the development and implementation of climate policies. So for example, in 2015, there was a law making it mandatory for intermunicipalities of more than 20,000 inhabitants to develop a climate air territorial energy plan. So the French governance system, despite the centralization effort, is still one of the most centralized systems in developed countries. So there's the EU level, there's the national level. There are 13 regions that were reduced from 22 in 2016, 96 departments, 9,700 groups, and 36,000 municipalities. And so there are various efforts for decentralization, new laws in place, improving the competencies of intermunicipalities. So for example, as of 2015, intermunicipalities became in charge of coordinating climate mitigation and adaptation strategies. But I added this scheme on the right to show that climate change adaptation could seem like a straightforward task, but it's not. It's especially in France because it's very centralized, the work, and it's very bureaucratic. A lot of local governments get stuck in bureaucratic work instead of getting creative. So the main research question is, how are French local authorities adapting and increasing the resilience of their cities to climate change? So to answer this question, it was necessary to develop an understanding of impacts of climate change on mid-sized French cities, the efforts of local governments to ensure climate resilient cities, as well as barriers and opportunities encountered by local governments. So it was essential to define governance, and the definition of this term could vary according to discipline. But according to Jagger and Strippes, in environmental studies, climate governance is a set of response measures, mechanisms, as well as diplomacy developed to steer social systems towards mitigating, preventing, or adapting to climate risks. And this is the definition that was adopted in this research. So this research adopts a case study comparative approach. Various mid-sized French cities were selected as case studies based on various selections criteria. So the first criteria was being a mid-sized city or having a population between 50,000 and 250,000 inhabitants, having received an environmental award, and being part of a coalition or a city network to share knowledge and best practices. So the interesting cases were Rouen, Lorient, Nancy, and Besançon. This research adopts a conceptual model that focuses on 7 areas of focus in the governance of climate change adaptation. So it starts by understanding impacts and vulnerabilities, developing adaptation strategies, implicating and mobilizing actors, implementing these developed strategies, monitoring and evaluation, understanding limiting and success factors, and improving the governance system in place. And it's a cycle. It's an ongoing process. So I'm going to present to you the case of Rouen, which is an application of the methodological approach and analysis of what is happening on the ground. So just some background information, the city of Rouen is in France. So this city of Rouen has a bit over 100,000 inhabitants, but then there's the metropolitan area of Rouen that includes 71 municipalities, and it has approximately 500,000 inhabitants. This city has won first prize in the category Facilities, Infrastructure, and Buildings during the Climate Adaptation Territories 2014 awards. So for data collection, the documents that were reviewed were impacts assessment, regional and territorial climate air energy plans, local agenda 21, as well as reports and articles published by environmental agencies, and interviews were conducted with key actors. So this case showed levers and limitations of the various areas of focus of governance of climate change adaptation. So for example, to understand impacts and vulnerabilities, there was a local IPCC established uniting 15 experts from various fields, doing studies that are particular to the cities. And the local actors are becoming increasingly aware of the importance of addressing this issue. However, there's so much knowledge at a national scale, a bit more knowledge at a regional level, but barely any knowledge at a local scale, and that is a barrier. Also, the awareness of citizens is insufficient with regards to impacts of climate change on their territory. So this city showed that it has a willingness to go beyond legal requirements, and it has a proper Agenda 21. But as I mentioned before, there are various levels of governance, and we see that there's a lack of coordination between the metropolitan area of Rouen and the city of Rouen. So the metropolitan area of Rouen developed its climate, air, energy territorial plan, but it didn't consult the city of Rouen, even though the city of Rouen is the largest municipality in the metropolitan area. So the city of Rouen developed its proper climate, air, energy plan without any coordination. And this is not really an adaptation plan. So no proper adaptation plan is developed, but some other of adaptation measures have been included in this plan. To implicate and mobilize actors, there's an interesting initiative. There's an Atelier COP21 that was established in the city center. It's an actual workshop that opens 7 days a week, and it welcomes the citizens to raise their awareness. But unfortunately, due to budget constraints, this atelier had to close its doors last summer. There's a lack of real participatory governance. So citizens are on the other side of the conversation, and they're not really involved in the decision making. The city is implementing various initiatives and small-scale experimentation projects to increase the share of greenery and adapt to climate change. However, there's a lack of technical, financial, and human resources impeding the implementation of these projects. And many projects are not aligned with the intention of the city of increasing the greenery. For example, the picture on the right, it shows that, yes, they want to increase the share of greenery, but instead of taking new projects as an opportunity to do so, the city keeps on mineralizing surfaces and adding asphalt. The city is also using Sitarchi label to monitor and evaluate its efforts, but this monitoring and evaluation tool is more focused on mitigation, and the monitoring and evaluation systems are still at their embryonic stage. However, this monitoring system allows to understand limiting and success factors, and annual sustainable reports are developed. Local actors are aware of barriers to implementation. However, there's a need for more studies and research, and there's no really clear identification of opportunities, as adaptation measures are still at an experimental level. And to improve the governance system in place, there is a municipal protection plan developed to increase the resilience of the city and its preparedness in case of emergency. And the city is developing climate projections. However, the update of impacts assessment and adaptation policies is not consistent. And also there's short-termism. And especially that climate change adaptation requires a long-term vision, but in local municipalities, the political term is usually of 4 or 5 years. So the political term or ambitions is usually shorter than the long-term vision of climate change. So to sum things up, there's a lack of, the main barriers are lack of coordination between different levels of governance, lack of technical, financial, and human resources, and contradiction between developed policies and implemented projects. However, what is special about this case is that there's a local group of experts to improve knowledge. There's a willingness to go beyond legal requirements, and they're experimenting locally. So the general conclusions for all case studies, mid-sized cities that were selected, it showed that these cities are pioneer in climate action. They proved their capacity for taking initiatives and experimenting, and their actions often preceded and inspired policies taking at a national scale. There is more attention given by policymakers to mitigation rather than adaptation. There is a gap between the city's objectives, knowledge, and allocated resources. The competencies of intermunicipalities have evolved. However, they need to develop their expertise and efforts in parallel in respect to the new allocated competencies. And the integration of climate adaptation is limited in urban planning. And intermunicipalities are focused mainly on raising awareness. They need to act more to mobilize and implicate other local actors. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And don't hesitate to ask questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Rim. Thank you very much for your presentation. Actually, there is a question concerning, you have mentioned coordination, issues related to coordination among different actors. And well, unfortunately, this is common in mid-sized cities and in larger cities. So what can be done? What can be done to improve the coordination between actors with different interests and different agendas? I know that might be a difficult question, but
yeah, it's not there's no straightforward answer to that. Yeah. But also the problem is that there's a lack of coordination between sectors, but also between different levels of governance. And I also worked on different case studies, for example, city of Vakro in Sweden. And it is pioneer because and there's coordination because all political parties have unanimously agreed that climate change is a priority. So whomever wins the election or is in charge, the priority will not change. So I think this is key. All parties need to unanimously agree that climate change is a priority. So, and one of the problems between the municipality, the city of Rouen and the metropolitan area of Rouen is that there's not really coordination because they're from different parties as well. So it makes it hard. So I think establishing that the need to address the issue and the need to put hand in hand is the beginning of this collaboration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this. Now we will move to the next speaker. Tieza Mica Santos was a visiting scholar at the Frankfurt Institute through the Alexander von Humboldt International Climate Protection Fellowship. She's currently a doctoral candidate under the joint program of the Technical University of Dresden in Germany. And she will be providing a presentation today on designing urban transition pathways towards SDG 11 and 13 through system dynamics. And she will be presenting lessons learned from the Germany's Sustainable City Framework. So over to you, Tieza.
Thank you so much. I will just share my slide. Okay. Guten Morgen, buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. I'm here to present my research on evaluating urban transformation SDG 11 and 13 pathways using systems dynamics and deriving the lessons from German cities, particularly in terms of their sustainable and climate resilient initiatives. Before I start, I'd just like to give a brief introduction that this research project is part of the initiative of the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung International Climate Protection Program with support from Fraunhofer Institute and the German Federal Ministry of the Environment, Nature, and Nuclear Safety. And this research is motivated by an understanding that cities are considered as frontliners in achieving national level targets of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 11 and 13 as they lead local level actions. And we have witnessed how urban transformation at the turn of the 20th century resulted to an increase in built infrastructure and accumulation of economic wealth in urban centers. However, human-driven challenges towards climate and ecological systems contribute to unsustainable development patterns. And with an estimate of more than 70% of the global population, which will be living in urban areas by 2050, economic activities, political process, and social and cultural interactions will be concentrated mostly in cities. So governing and managing present-day transition pathways and urban transformation will require strategies that go beyond traditional spatial zoning and urban planning methodology to cope with prevailing development trajectory as climate change amplifies existing risks and create new ones. And in this research, I argue that there is no best fit model of a sustainable sustainable city, let alone a climate resilient transition pathways. Because cities are considered as a complex system of systems, and decisions and policies are comprised of trade-offs and complementary solutions. So therefore, this research further argues that while cities are largely exposed to risks and vulnerabilities, they're also key to unlocking sustainable and climate resilient urban transitions, and must therefore have the capacity, institutions, and system in order to absorb current and environmental stresses, consequently other forms of risk and vulnerabilities. So in terms of the research goals and objective, it explores German cities' sustainable and climate resilient urban development transformation. And it focuses on which elements serve as contributing variables to the dynamic characteristic of city building, urban development, and transformation process. It also looks into how they fit and operate within traditional policy and decision-making, problem-solving, institutional design, implementation, and social interaction in cities. And in the end, at the end of this research, it intends to draw lessons from German cities, which can then be exported to Philippine cities, where I came from, as part of the knowledge transfer of development cooperation and partnership between Germany and the Philippines. So in terms of the research question, I raised 3 points. First is, how can sustainable and climate resilient city framework be applied at the local level, so at the city level, which supports an urban transition pathway leading to national level SDG 1113. And what are the elements or components that are key to designing this framework that can contribute to urban transformation anchored on sustainability and climate resilience? And finally, what are the lessons that can be exported from the German city experience and later shared to emerging cities in the Philippines? In terms of methodology, the research employs a multi-step method. The first is a desk review of existing frameworks, declarations, principles, and standards on sustainability and climate resilience that calls for cities to take an active role. In terms of the second step, it involves a qualitative data collection through desk review of public documents, such as policies, strategic plans, project reports, which is complemented by explorative interview with assigned expert or identified expert to develop an in-depth case study of German cities. And the 3 initial cities, which I will later present, are selected for the case study. These are Essen, Heidelberg, and Frankfurt. And these cities were initially selected as a pilot initiative, as a pilot of the research, because they have demonstrated sustainability and climate resilient initiatives on projects. The third step involves a quantitative data, which is to be collected and analyzed from 190 German cities with at least 50,000 population size and with varying geographic and economic profile. It's a very basic selection criteria because, as I mentioned earlier, transformation is context specific, and therefore the transfer of lessons from Germany to the Philippines will require different ways and adaptation measures. And the results will be used to develop a transition toolkit and evaluation framework for sustainable and climate resilient urban transition strategies as part of the knowledge transfer to emerging Philippine cities. And consequently, it will also use the systems dynamics to understand the complexity of urban systems and the relationship of the variables that are identified in this study. As a preliminary insight, based on the survey of standards, framework, and indices, these sustainability and climate resilient urban development principles and frameworks provide the structure for analysis and define the basis for assessing performance, common practices, and uniqueness of cities. And furthermore, performance indices and standards on sustainable and resilient cities were also considered in defining which dimensions and aspects will be analyzed. And the research looked at international level, regional level specific to EU. I also look into some ASEAN, APEC, OECD just to have a bit of comparison, and the national level frameworks on sustainability and climate resilience, and some looking at institutional indices, standards, and ratings. So it was a rapid review of these frameworks and standards, and to limit the scope of and address the gaps in existing literature and framework. The dimensions and aspects are categorized into hard or tangible, and soft or intangible assets, or elements of sustainable and climate urban development transformation. I'm coming from the perspective that while many research standards and indices focus on hard assets, such as green and blue infrastructure, mobility infrastructure, or green space allocation, and so on, the research focuses on the soft assets and are then grouped into 6 general parameters for performance assessments. The reason for doing so is because frameworks and declarations are often broad statements and are hard to operationalize at the local level, and the implementation becomes different. And setting of common standards and measurement systems or indicator is challenging if applied to different contexts, especially across German cities and when applied to Philippine cities later on. So from a macro perspective, I posit that urban development at the turn of the 20th century demonstrate an organic growth of cities as a consequence of the 19th century industrial movement. And these game-changing modes of production, economy, and so on, which took place in this period, fueled the transition of largely rural and agrarian societies towards urban regions in Europe, as seen in the German cities. Although there remains the questions of conditions that gave rise to the first cities, the emergence of urban zones and city centers is a product of agglomeration of economic activities. And this complex process contributes to economic and political advantages, which include concentration of patterns of production, consumption, optimized trade links, and shared infrastructure, and organized human and capital division of labor. And so, based on this summary and initial desk study, I was able to extract these soft and intangible assets, which are governance and leadership, Kommunales, Steuerung und Führung in German, institutional capacity and development, stakeholders engagement and participation, and then the fourth is looking at strategy, management, implementation, and risk management. And of course, looking at monitoring how projects and services are evaluated, and of course, data management or knowledge management, and finally, finance strategy and management. So I'm just going to present some highlights of the case study and not go with a thorough discussion of the 6 in each of the cases.
Do it a bit quick, because we are very close to the end of the session, and we have another presenter. Thank you.
Okay, so for Frankfurt, I highlight the stakeholders engagement and participation. Basically, its strategy is drawing up its integrated development plans, which happen in 3 layers. It starts at the top level authority, initiating collaboration across multidisciplinary teams and departments. And this translates down to innovative participatory citizen engagement with the city council, leading the initiative in advancing the fundamental urban development principle, goals, and strategies. In terms of finance, relative to other German cities, Frankfurt has one of the biggest administrations, which implies that there is availability of funding allocated for the operation and implementation of the project of the city. So with the high demand in urban space to accommodate the growth of businesses and residential areas, the city focuses on investing in public transport to keep up with its growth. And it also is a strategy to support the city's low emission zone or Umweltzone, which is a top priority to lessen the carbon emission. In terms of Essen, it's known for its phrase von Grau zu Grün, which characterizes dynamic transformation that has shaped Essen over the recent decade. And over time, the decline in production demand in coal and iron led to the closure of the city's last coal mine in 1986. And therefore, it capitalized on its governance and leadership, as well as strategy management, implementation, and delivery of services, which basically led SN to developing a strong connection with the regional administration, as well as other cities within the rural area. And SN has long been engaged in the process of experimentation and innovation in the aspect of sustainable development. So they had been recognized as the Green Capital Year for 2017, and beyond that, they're now pushing for the Uber di Grune Dekade in-house, which is basically heightened to challenge SN's city government and the citizens to share and lead the sustainability and climate resilient transformation, not just within the city limits, but to the rural metropolis area as well. As with Heidelberg, which is best characterized as a co-evolution of town and university campuses, basically its physical and geographic profile reflects a long history of urban transformation. And with all these transformation taking place in Heidelberg, its strengths lies in terms of institutional capacity and development, wherein there's a close collaboration within the city council and designating a team whose main function and expertise are specific to projects and programs, as in the case of urban development and climate initiatives, for instance, the International Building Exhibition. And the city's finally, and in terms of monitoring and evaluation, Heidelberg has data and knowledge management in the city's development master plan, which is related to its mobility infrastructure. And therefore, in terms of the next steps, following these experiences from the 3 German case studies, although this is pending because of COVID, there will be a stock take survey of 190 German cities, basically looking at all the 6 areas identified.
Sorry, Tieza, we need to move to the next presentation. So if you just want to conclude, that would be very much.
Yes, this is the last slide. Yeah, so this will be carried on later on after evaluation on the strategy to move forward. So this will be the quantitative survey that will be conducted to the remainder of the 190 cities, which will be in a quantitative format. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tieza. Because of the time pressure, we will move straight to our last presentation, and that is Giovanni Vicintini. He's an urban planner working for the municipality of Padova in northern Italy in the environmental department. He has a strong experience in data analysis and in the definition of urban strategies and policies for mitigating the impacts of climate change and increasing urban resilience. Today, he will be presenting the case of a project called Veneto Adapt, which is an example to develop local adaptation strategies integrated with mitigation in a multi-level governance approach. So if you have questions, again, just go to the Q&A. We'll try to answer to these questions at the end of the session. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Aytor. And thank you all. Thank you for the invitation. I will rapidly go through our project, the Veneto Adapt project. This is a project funded by the LIFE program. It is an ongoing project that will end next year, and it's focused on the Veneto region, a region in Italy, in the northeast part of Italy. We are the leading city of the project, city of Padova, but we have a strong consortium made by a different size of municipalities, so from the bigger cities in our region to the smaller ones. So we have a very different kind of municipalities working with us. The process is this one. With these 5 steps, I have already seen in the previous presentation a similar methodology existing elsewhere. and we are adopting a similar process also in our region. So the first step in our process is the evaluation of the existing adaptive capacity of our region. The second step, very important, is the governance analysis. As you can see on the right of my slide, we tried to map all the actors working on the adaptation issue in our region, in our cities. So public and private companies, because each one of them has a specific role in the adaptation process. Some of them in the planning phase, some others in the implementation phase, and others in the monitoring phase. The next step is the analysis of the plans and codes in force. So existing instruments and strategies. We already have, for example, a sustainable energy action plan in the city of Padova, and we are trying with this project to increase the number of actions working on the adaptation issue. And we are trying to draft and finalize the sustainable energy and climate action plan within the Covenant of Major initiative. For us, it was really important to start from the analysis of the data set. So understand what is happening from the climatic point of view in our region, in our cities. So we collected a lot of data from the climatic data from the meteorological stations in our region, mainly temperatures and precipitations. And we tried to find out, as you can see here in the example, what is happening in our region in the last 50 years. And we have seen that the most affecting impacts in our region are the urbanite highlands, which is affecting mainly the city centers of our cities. But also we are facing an increase of flooding risk in our cities, and also on the other side, long drought periods between the extreme events. Yeah, we started with the analysis of the data, and we find out that we have three main extreme events affecting our cities: the strong winds in Padova, and for example, the heavy precipitation downburst, very impacting our cities in Verona, in Padova, in Venice, three cities in the project. The next step was the analysis of the vulnerability. And this is a very crucial step for us, because here we started with a very long process with the GIS tools, starting to understand where in our cities, which part of our cities were most affected by the climate impacts. And as you can see in the next slide here, you can we mapped on the part of our city. This is the city of Padova, most affected by the urbanite highlands. Why it is important to understand where the area most affected, because we have to downscale our actions to the neighborhood, to the single building. We have to understand, in this case, for example, where elderly people is living in our city, where the situation of the building stock is worse than in other parts of the city, where, for example, the use of materials is bad compared to the urbanite highlands, and where we have to implement specific actions, because the adaptation means to understand locally where the impacts are in our cities and our territory. So this is a very important step in our process. Of course, we are working under the frame of the Covenant of Major initiative. So we are drafting the Sustainable Energy Action Plan and Climate Action Plan. So integrating the mitigation and the adaptation, and we find out some actions that are can be win-win. So have some positive impacts both on the adaptation side, but also on the mitigation side, particularly for what concerns the urbanite highlands, which are increasing the electricity demand in our city, and we are trying to boost the photovoltaic installation on our rooftops to face the increase of the energy demand. And then we find out 6 actions, a block of actions related to the adaptation, which has been included in all our SECAPs in the region. The first one is the update of the local building code, a very powerful instrument for municipalities to fix new rules and to provide incentives to citizens to boost, for example, the investments in green roofs, green facades, water tanks, etc. The second action, very important, but related to the management of the emergency, is the review of the Civil Protection Action Plan. So, for example, we started to include in this plan new climatic risk for example, the urban island and the heat waves in summer period. And we are trying to identify the people at risk and specific emergency measures for them, for example, for elderly people in this case. Another action, very important, is the reduction of the hydraulic risk, and we are drafting the water plan for this reduction. And then we are trying to appoint a chief resilience officer in all our cities. This is a very important person because, for example, in the city of Padua, we have 22 departments, and we have to identify a person and a group of people working on the adaptation issue in a structured way. And so we are trying to appoint a chief resilience officer to create a working group working on the implementation of the action plan and in the monitoring phase in the next years. Of course, also we are trying to increase the number of trees and green areas. This is a quite popular action existing in all Europe. But what we did is to try to increase the number of trees where we find out through the GIS tools that we have a bigger impact of urban islands. So we try to identify clearly the areas where we have to increase the number of trees, where we have the risk and the impact. And then the end of the project, we started with some pilot actions. This is the city of Padua. In the city of Padua, we are trying to create a green belt around the city to stop on one side the urban sprawl, and on the other side, we are trying to recreate the minor hydraulic network, yes, to reduce the flooding risk and the hydraulic risk. Yes, few information about our pilot action. For example, here you can see on the right that we are trying also to recreate the agricultural landscape. So to recreate, we've chosen some specific trees and shrub essences to recreate the landscape, and on the same time to increase the resilience of our city. This is my last slide, and then we can go through the question and answer session. This is the monitoring of the action plan is, of course, one of the most important parts of our plan because, yes, we are trying to implement the actions, but now we have to monitor the correct implementation, the effectiveness of the actions. And what we found here is that when we spoke with the other institution in our region is that they are more interested in the economic part of the plan. So we try to estimate and to calculate the economic impact of the climate change in our region. So we are trying.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Because we have 2 minutes, we're gonna just go straight to the questions. So there is we might have time to 2 questions. They're related to Fang-yu and Giovanni, and because both questions are related to nature-based nature-based solutions. So the question for Fang-yu is whether the case study in Barcelona was only for the Raval or it was for the whole city, and concerning drainage, natural drainage systems, if there are, if you have data that is proving its efficiency, because then it could be a scale up to other cities having flooding problems. So for Giovanni as well, you have mentioned this drainage system, this nature drainage system. So has this proved to be efficient during the last floods that you showed in August 2020?
Yes, we are monitoring the impact, the effectiveness of the nature-based solution in a specific part of the city, the pilot action, and we we've seen that it was really effective because in that part of the city now is safe. So for sure, we have to extend that pilot action to the other part of the cities, and it costs a lot. So we have to understand where we prioritize the actions. This is the most important part of our work, because we don't have the money to implement everywhere the action, the nature-based solution, and we have to start from the most affected part of the city. This is the most important part of our work.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. I don't think we have more time for questions because the organization is really strict in terms of timing. I would like to thank all the speakers here today. Your presentations have been really interesting, and there is and I think there is a lot that can be taken for this, and it can be implemented in many cities, and we hope that some of what you have mentioned can be scaled up to other cities in low to middle and high income countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.